Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling something that I think a lot of people are talking about these days about this. How do we break free from manipulative narratives and reclaim our power?
Hmm.
You've sent us some really thought-provoking sources,
Yeah,
speeches, documentaries, analyses of history and politics, all kind of grappling with this idea of power dynamics and how they shape our understanding of the world.
yeah. It's really fascinating to me how all these sources, even though they can come from such different places, they all kind of touch on this theme of control,
Right.
particularly, when it comes to marginalized groups.
Yeah.
And they really push us to examine how these narratives are constructed, who benefits from them, and, ultimately how we can start to see the world with fresh eyes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into our first theme here, the power of narratives. Just to set the stage, I wanted to bring up something Bill Cosby said in his reflection on Black history and slavery.
Okay.
Now, I know Cosby's been a controversial figure in recent years, but what he says here about the way history is taught, it's pretty thought-provoking.
Absolutely. And Cosby talks about how we're often presented with a version of history that kind of downplays the achievements of pre-colonial African cultures.
Mm,
And he uses these humorous examples,
right.
like European artists borrowing from African art. But it really underscores a really serious point, the erasure of African contributions from the dominant narrative.
Yeah, it's almost like we're given this incomplete puzzle,
Yeah.
and we're trying to make sense of the world with missing pieces.
Exactly. And what Vandana Shiva, the Indian scholar and activist, adds to this conversation is this idea that this selective history is often used to justify existing power structures.
Hmm.
She talks about the mechanistic worldview, this idea that nature is just a machine to be exploited, which she argues is at the root of so many of our ecological and social crises.
Mm.
It's a worldview that separates humans from nature and ultimately justifies the exploitation of both.
Yeah. So we've got this historical erasure happening on one hand,
Yeah.
and then this worldview that justifies domination on the other. It starts to feel like a pretty deliberate system, right?
It does. And then you bring in someone like Gothics, who in his work talks about the media landscape
Yeah.
and how emotions are often manipulated to push specific agendas.
Right.
It's like we're being bombarded with stories designed to make us feel certain ways, think certain things, without always being aware of the forces behind them.
Yeah. That's kind of scary when you think about it.
It-
It's like how much of what we believe is actually our own and how much has been shaped by these external narratives.
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's why developing critical thinking skills is so crucial.
Hmm.
We need to be able to step back and question those dominant narratives, examine them from multiple perspectives, and consider who benefits from them.
Mhm.
Whether we're talking about history, environmental issues, or current events, that ability to think critically is key to understanding the complexities of the world around us.
For sure. Okay, so we've established that these narratives have immense power.
Yeah.
But how does that power actually play out in the real world? Our next theme dives into a tactic that's been used for centuries: divide and conquer.
Right. And this is where Minister Louis Farrakhan's speech becomes particularly relevant. He talks about how colonial powers deliberately created tribal and ethnic divisions in Africa as a way to maintain control.
Yeah, it's like that old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. They knew they couldn't conquer a unified population, so they sowed seeds of discord.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that Vandana Shiva describes a similar strategy used by the British in India, what they call divide and rule.
Right.
They exploited existing religious and caste differences to weaken the resistance to their colonial rule.
So this tactic has been used across continents throughout history.
Yeah.
It's almost like a blueprint for maintaining power.
It is. And what's concerning is that we see echoes of this divide and conquer strategy in contemporary issues as well.
Mm.
Look at how political instability and conflict in various regions are often framed through a lens that reinforces existing divisions, whether those are ethnic, religious, or political.
Yeah.
It's like we're constantly being nudged to see each other as us versus them
Yeah.
instead of recognizing our common humanity.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting, because we also have Dick Gregory's perspective to consider. He makes this really provocative assertion that many protests are actually staged.
Right. And it's a statement that should make us pause and think critically about what we see happening around us.
Yeah.
Are these social movements organic uprisings, or are they, as Gregory suggests, orchestrated events designed to further specific agendas? It's a question that requires us to really examine the motivations behind these movements, who's funding them, and ultimately who benefits from the chaos or change they create.
Wow, this is getting pretty heavy. It feels like we're constantly being bombarded with information, and it's hard to know what to believe. We're being manipulated by historical narratives, divided by strategic tactics. It can all feel pretty overwhelming. So what do we do? How do we break free from this cycle?
It can definitely feel daunting,
Yeah.
but I think the first step is awareness. Just recognizing these tactics, understanding that they exist, is a huge step towards reclaiming our power. And that leads us to our final theme for this part of our deep dive,
hmm
reclaiming identity and power. It's about shifting from a place of feeling like a victim of circumstance to a place of agency and action.
Okay, I like where this is going because honestly, up until now, this has felt a little heavy.
Yeah.
Let's talk solutions. What does that reclaiming process actually look like?
Well, Farrakhan talks about the importance of a mental revolution, specifically for Black people.
Hmm?
He calls for a reclaiming of Black history and knowledge, highlighting the achievements of ancient African civilizations like Mali and Songhai that are often overlooked in mainstream education.
Yes, I love that he emphasizes those advancements in science, technology, and art that often go unacknowledged.
Right.
It's like a whole hidden history waiting to be rediscovered.
Exactly. And
Ugh.
rediscovering that history is a powerful act of resistance. It's about understanding your roots, your heritage, and seeing yourself in a new light. It's about rejecting the limited narratives that have been imposed on you and embracing a more complete and empowering story of who you are.
It's about taking ownership of your narrative, right?
Yeah.
Not letting others define who you are or what you're capable of.
Precisely. And that reclamation, it extends beyond history.
Hmm.
Farrakhan argues that, the West has built its civilization on the backs of Black innovation. What he calls intellectual colonization.
Yep.
He makes this really compelling point about ancient Egypt, often hailed as the cradle of Western civilization.
Right.
But was it the Greeks and Romans who were the true geniuses? Or were they building upon knowledge gained from African scholars? It's something that's rarely acknowledged.
Yeah, it's almost like we're looking at a palimpsest where you can see traces of the original text beneath the rewritten version, but it takes effort to uncover that hidden layer of truth.
It does. And Farrakhan's message is clear. Recognizing this intellectual theft, seeing those contributions that have been erased or appropriated, is key to breaking free from mental dependence.
So in a way, reclaiming your history is about reclaiming your power.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that the tools for progress and advancement are already within you, within your heritage. It's about recognizing your own inherent worth and potential,
Mm.
regardless of what any external narrative might say. And it's about building upon that foundation to create a better future. But that brings us to another crucial piece of the puzzle, unity.
Right, because we can't do this alone. Even if we break free from those limiting narratives individually, we still need to come together to challenge the systems that perpetuate them. And I think that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll explore how these ideas of unity, solidarity, and collective action play a role in reclaiming power and shaping a more just world.
Yeah. Picking up on that idea of unity, Farrakhan's speech gets even more challenging when he starts talking about, those deeply personal things. Faith and religion.
Hmm.
He doesn't shy away from the uncomfortable questions about how religion could be used as a tool of control.
Yeah, that part really struck me too. He argues that Christianity and to some extent Islam were weaponized by the West to keep Black people subservient. That's a controversial statement, but it does make you think, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. He's pointing to this idea that suffering was presented as part of a divine plan,
Right?
a test of faith that would be rewarded in the afterlife. It's a powerful message, especially when delivered alongside promises of salvation.
And as he points out, that message benefited those in power. It encouraged acceptance of oppression, passivity in the face of injustice. It's almost like a form of spiritual bypassing, using faith to avoid confronting the harsh realities of systemic oppression.
And it's not just a historical phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Even today, we see how religion can be used for political gain, how certain narratives are promoted while others are demonized. It's that selective morality again, shaping behavior to fit a particular agenda.
So how do we navigate this? How do we engage with faith in a way that empowers rather than enslaves?
That's the million-dollar question Farrakhan suggests, reclaiming those true spiritual traditions, finding faith that empowers rather than enslaves. He's calling for a return to the source, a re-examination of those deeply held beliefs.
It's about asking those tough questions. Who benefits from these beliefs? Do they align with my values? Do they promote love and liberation? Or do they reinforce fear and control?
Exactly. It's
Mhm.
about taking ownership of your spiritual journey, just like we talked about taking ownership of your personal narrative.
Mm.
It's about finding a faith that resonates with your soul and empowers you to live a life of purpose and authenticity.
Okay, so we've talked about reclaiming history, reclaiming faith, but where does that leave us in terms of taking action? What are the practical steps we can take to break free from these systems of control?
Well, Farrakhan paints a pretty stark picture of the West's intentions. He argues that the goal is to keep Black people forever in chains, both mental and physical. He points to those recurring interventions, the economic systems that keep wealth flowing out of Africa, the media narratives that reinforce negative
It's
stereotypes.
like a multi-layered system designed to maintain control, right? You've
Yeah.
got these economic forces, these political structures, these social narratives, all working together to limit possibilities.
And the most insidious part, according to Farrakhan, is the control of the minds of Black people everywhere. It's about perpetuating a sense of dependence, of needing external validation. He's saying we've been conditioned to believe that our worth comes from outside ourselves, from the approval of those in power.
So how do we break free from that conditioning? How do we reclaim that sense of inner worth and agency?
Farrakhan's call to action is simple. Wake up, recognize the game, and start playing by your own rules. He believes the answer lies in unity, in building a deep, unshakable solidarity that transcends those artificial divisions of tribe, religion, and nationality.
It's about recognizing that shared struggle, understanding that your liberation is intertwined with the liberation of others. It's about moving beyond those us versus them narratives that keep us divided and disempowered.
And it's not just about awareness, it's about action. It's about building something new, creating alternative systems and structures that support collective well-being. It's about rewriting the script not just for ourselves, but for future generations.
But it's not enough to just tear down the old systems, right? We need a vision for what we want to create in their place. And that's where I think Vandana Shiva's concept of Earth democracy comes in.
Absolutely. Earth democracy offers a powerful framework for building a more just and sustainable world. She talks about shifting away from this dominant paradigm of domination and control toward a system built on interconnectedness and respect for all life.
It's a move away from that me versus them mentality that's been so prevalent. In fact, it reminds me of what Dr. Frances Cress Welsing said about racism being a system for white genetic survival. She argued that this fear of genetic annihilation drives the need to dominate and control others, to maintain a sense of superiority.
That's a really interesting connection. And Earth democracy challenges that at its core. It's about building bridges, fostering cooperation, and understanding that true progress requires collective action. It's about recognizing that the well-being of the planet is intrinsically linked to the well-being of all its inhabitants, regardless of race, religion, or any other artificial division.
So it's about moving beyond those individualistic, competitive narratives and embracing a more holistic, collaborative approach.
Exactly. And it's about challenging those systems that prioritize profit over people and planet. And this is where George Carlin's critique of consumerism becomes so relevant. He calls out the emptiness of this consumerist culture, the constant pursuit of things we don't need to impress people we don't like.
It's that classic line, trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? But the Joneses are miserable too. It's a never-ending cycle of wanting more, never feeling satisfied.
And Carlin is urging us to break free from that cycle. He's asking us to wake up from that hypnotic trance of consumerism and reclaim our time, our energy, and our attention.
It's about redefining success, finding meaning and purpose outside of that material rat race. It's about living intentionally, consciously creating a world that aligns with our values.
And that, to me, is true empowerment. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, embracing our shared humanity, and working together to create a world that works for everyone.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from reclaiming history and faith to challenging systems of oppression and embracing a more holistic worldview. But I think there's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore: the role of individual action. How do we translate these big ideas into tangible steps we can take in our own lives? How do we move from awareness to action?
You know, it can feel kind of overwhelming to think about how to actually make a difference.
Right. Where do we even start?
Yeah, and it's easy to feel powerless when you look at these huge systems. But I think what all of these sources point to is that real change, it starts with individual action.
Okay, but what does that actually look like? I mean, we're not all going to lead a revolution or dismantle global capitalism overnight, right?
No, no, it's not about becoming superheroes or anything like that.
Great.
It's about those small, everyday choices that might seem insignificant on their own, but collectively they can create a ripple effect.
Okay, I like that. So give me an example. What kind of choices are we talking about?
Well, think about what George Carlin said about consumerism. We can start by becoming more conscious consumers.
Mm.
Do we really need that new gadget, that trendy outfit? Or are we just buying into a system that thrives on our dissatisfaction?
So it's about questioning our motivations, being mindful of the impact our choices have, not just on ourselves, but on the planet and other people.
Exactly. And it can go beyond just what we buy.
Okay.
It's about how we spend our time, what information we consume, how we engage with the world around us. Do we support businesses that align with our values? Do we educate ourselves on the issues that matter to us? Do we use our voices to speak out against injustice?
It sounds like it's about becoming more aware of those everyday choices and making sure that they reflect our values and the kind of world we want to create.
And it's about recognizing that we have more power than we often realize. We can choose to support systems of exploitation, or we can choose to support systems of liberation.
Right, right. Yeah, that brings to mind Vandana Shiva's idea of Earth democracy. She talks about creating local, community-based solutions, things like seed saving, farmers markets, alternative economies that prioritize people and planet over profit.
Exactly. It's about taking back control of our food systems, our energy sources, our local economies.
Mm.
It's about creating those alternative models that demonstrate a different way of being in the world.
Yeah. It almost sounds like we need a paradigm shift,
Yeah.
a move away from this individualistic, competitive mindset towards a more collaborative, community-oriented approach.
Yeah, and I think that's where Farrakhan's call for unity comes in. It's about recognizing our shared humanity, building bridges across those artificial divides that have been used to keep us separated and disempowered.
It's about understanding that our liberation is interconnected, that we're all in this together. And it starts with those small acts of kindness, those everyday gestures of solidarity that remind us that we're not alone.
And, sometimes that simple act of connecting with someone, of listening to their story, of sharing your own can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
It can break down those walls of fear and distrust that have been built up over generations.
Absolutely. Wow, this has been quite a journey. We've gone from ancient African empires to modern media manipulation, from the power of narratives to the importance of individual action. It's a lot to take in, but it feels hopeful, doesn't it?
It doesn't.
There's a path forward, a way to create a world that's more just, more equitable, more sustainable.
It definitely feels that way to me. What all these sources remind us is that we have the power to shape our own destinies, both individually and collectively.
Mm.
It starts with questioning those narratives that have been imposed on us, reclaiming our history and our power, and making choices that align with our values. And it's about building those connections, those communities of support and solidarity that will allow us to create the kind of world we want to live in. Yeah.
Beautifully said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the profound implications of these diverse perspectives. What small step can you take today to break free from those limiting narratives and reclaim your power? What story will you choose to write for yourself and for the world?
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Till next time.